Just give me 1 second while I work out how to use this.
Actually, no, you have control.
We're all good. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. Just want to acknowledge country to start with and acknowledge that we're meeting on Gadigal land this morning and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So as Steph mentioned, my name's Jack and I'm a postdoctoral research fellow with NCCRED, and I'm going to be delivering some research around NCCRED's Prompt Response Network, which, as many people in the room will know, is a national network which brings together stakeholders across Australia to inform how we're responding to emerging drugs of concern. In our presentation this morning, we're going to talk about some work that we're delivering next year around anecdotal reporting in Australia. But before we get onto it, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Jess.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, I'm Jess Doumany. I'm the National Research Lead with AVIL, the peak body for harm reduction in Australia, and also on the board of NUA. And yeah, very pleased to be here today and speaking to the community involvement that we'll be providing and support for this project.
So we've heard already this morning what anecdotal reporting is, so there's going to be a bit of a recap here, but essentially anecdotal reporting are just insights which come directly from community, from service providers, from peer workers about unusual observations as they relate to drugs or drug supply. So they can be increasing harms, unexpected events, or just other unusual incidents. Importantly, these are not analytically confirmed, but when we talk about an anecdotal reporting system, we're talking about the collection of this information in a systematic way. We've heard a little bit from Vicky already this morning about the power of anecdotal reporting, and that is that it can really triangulate other data sources. So when we have data from emergency, from ambulance, anecdotal reporting can be a powerful source of triangulation to indicate what might be going on. But it can also be a powerful source of information in jurisdictions where there's not other data sources available. And just by way of context for this work, this is a program of work which has been directed by the PRN membership for a long time. We've had a strong indication that this is something that we want in Australia. So we've the work that we're presenting comes off the back of a lot of consultation. And we present this work with acknowledgement that anecdotal reporting is something that has been happening and is happening in community for a long time. And it really leverages work that's existing within the sector already and just work that happens kind of within communities of people who use drugs, who want to look out for each other. So I'll pass it over to you to talk about that, Jess.
Yeah. So just extending on what Jack said there, anecdotal reporting has obviously existed for a long time, sort of informally and ad hoc within drug using communities at sort of micro and macro levels, and certainly sort of to give applied examples in a community context, having come from Northern Rivers, Nimbin, which is I guess a microcosm of drug use in itself. In a community like that, you definitely hear on the street and through your cohorts about any abnormalities pertaining to drugs before you're going to hear it through authorities. And especially, for instance, in a time during COVID where access to services was to a degree inhibited and you were very much reliant on word of mouth and supply was an issue. For instance, in Nimbin, that was how I became aware of fentanyl in heroin and with people dropping and seizuring, and that sort of was very much a community reaction before any sort of involvement of authorities picking up on that. And yeah, it's sort of very similar in how that operates within the methamphetamine community as well. And in a community like Nimbin, often those dealers will be driven out of town before authorities are even aware of that. And with the advent sort of online platforms like Telegram and Signal and the online distribution channels that exist as well in the drug communities, you see increasingly dealers putting up the testing of their drugs, the purity, which is sort of a reflection of, I guess, a pushback on the side of the community front, I guess, to have their own accountability and transparency mechanisms, again, separate to sort of any formal authorities.
So we've heard a bit already this morning from the other presentations about why we might want to do this. And as Jess mentions, a program of work like this really builds on community strength and leverages community strengths around sharing information, looking out for each other. As Vicky mentioned, anecdotal reporting can really enable timely response to emerging harms, potentially before harms have even occurred. It can support data triangulation. It can support where there's not other data sources available. But it also, Harry Sumnall in his talk this morning emphasized this notion of credibility and trust in early warning systems. And there's a lot of evidence around anecdotal reporting from the disaster management literature, which indicates that when you prioritize people's own wisdom and engage them in a system, it really supports that building of trust in the system as well. And so that's something we want to look at with our anecdotal reporting system too. The image on that slide, I didn't actually know that Harry was going to talk about this at great detail, but it's an image from the Red Alert, which Harry spoke about, happening in Ireland in November of 2023. In that case, anecdotal reports were the first source of information that people had to respond to that Red Alert. There were other data sources available, but it was anecdotal reports from service providers that first alerted the public health team that they needed to respond. And then anecdotal reports continue to help that team with targeting their response throughout the course of that outbreak. So targeting where those particular road signs would go, for example. So it's a good example of how anecdotal reporting can be really good, timely information.
I suppose in terms of, in taking this project forward, there's been sort of, a very conscious and active effort to have community involvement, both through ABLE and our membership and sort of, peers from the outset, recognising that for this system to be accessible and to, I guess, be appropriately a reflection of the different points at which and how people who use drugs interact with that frontline network. Obviously, the process of co-design will ensure that whatever sort of the end result is, it is accessible to people who use drugs and reflects those different points of interaction across that frontline network, so that we really can leverage what does exist naturally, and making sure that it's also representative of urban and regional experiences of people who use drugs in that context too.
And, NCRED's obviously a research organisation, and so we're going to be developing this system in a research framework because we have a lot of questions about anecdotal reporting. I think we can learn a lot from sort of Vicky's practice example, but in a local context, we have questions too. So first we have questions about how do we design an anecdotal reporting system in terms of the actual data collection tool. And then we have questions about how do we implement that? What's our data moderation process? How do we share that data? So we're planning to conduct this project next year through a kind of implementation research framework where we interview a lot of different stakeholders in Australia about their perceptions of anecdotal reporting. And we also work with a co-design working group alongside AVIL to design up the anecdotal reporting system and to consider a bunch of questions in that design process in terms of acceptability. So is anecdotal reporting acceptable to community, to peer workers, to other service providers? And what mediates that acceptability? What can we do to increase that acceptability? Feasibility. Is anecdotal reporting feasible in different contexts, in different Australian states and territories which have very different infrastructures around drug information systems? And then appropriateness. So when we have this system up and running, does it work? Do people who are making decisions about responses to emerging concerns relating to drugs use anecdotal reports in their decision-making process? And what can we do to kind of mediate the appropriateness or the usefulness of anecdotal reporting too? So those are some of the research questions that we're hoping to answer through this project.
So basically the next sort of 12 months starting up, from start of next year, as Jack said, was really going to be focused on the actualization stage and sort of applying an iterative and sort of relatively flexible approach within that framework to, as Jack said, sort of really, I guess, make sure that we're achieving, the most appropriate outcome, and sort of modelling that across different cohorts and environments, but also involving community and people who use drugs in that translation process, and also emphasizing sort of the feedback and translation to have their input and I guess complete that loop. So we're really actually achieving an output that's appropriate, resonant, and going to give us a really effective baseline to work from in actually applying and testing this.
Yeah. That was what we had to present. I just want to say some acknowledgements. First, acknowledging AVIL, who we're doing this in real partnership with, and they've been really wonderful to partner with so far. We also have a research team around a broader program of PRN research who I've listed there and I want to acknowledge. And I just want to acknowledge as well that the PRN project is something which has existed really since 2018, and a whole lot of people have input into the PRN to get us to where we are today. And I want to acknowledge that process and that wider network as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.